The lake had always been my escape. Nestled between tall pines, my cabin wasn't just property, it was peace, silence, and the kind of freedom you can't buy in the city. I spent summers there fishing at dawn, winters by the crackling fire, and every season in between reminded me why I fought to keep it. Which is why the morning Karen barged through my front door, I knew my quiet retreat had just turned into a battlefield. Karen wasn't just any neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of the Homeowners Association, the type of woman who treated her clipboard like a royal scepter. Sharp haircut, sharper tongue, and the permanent scowl of someone who believed rules applied only to others. The HOA had limited jurisdiction around the lake, but in her mind, that meant unlimited power. I heard her before I saw her. The screen door slammed, boots stomped across my wooden floor, and then her voice, a nasal, commanding bark. This cabin is in violation of multiple codes, and I will not stand by while you disrespect the community standards. I set my coffee mug down slowly, keeping my expression calm. Inside the cabin, across the room, my guests sat quietly, watching with mild curiosity. Karen didn't even glance their way. Too busy being outraged. I leaned back in my chair. "Good morning, Karen. To what do I owe the pleasure of you breaking and entering my home?" She gasped like I'd accused her of treason. "Breaking and entering? Don't be ridiculous. As president of the HOA, I have every right to inspect properties that fall under our governance." I raised an eyebrow. "Except this one doesn't. You know as well as I do that my cabin is outside your HOA boundaries. Always has been." That didn't slow her down. Karen marched to the window, pointed dramatically at my freshly painted shutters, and snapped a photo with her phone. "Unauthorized paint color," she announced, as if declaring a crime scene. "Non-conforming to aesthetic guidelines. Fines will follow." I almost laughed. Guidelines that don't apply here. But Karen wasn't listening. She scribbled furiously on her clipboard, muttering about community harmony and mandatory compliance. Every word dripped with self-importance. She wasn't just checking boxes, she was performing, like an actress in a one-woman play titled The HOA Rules Supreme. What she didn't realize was that her performance had an audience. My guest, quiet, observant, seated comfortably with folded hands, watched every move, every word. And while Karen saw only me as her target, the real weight in that room came from the person she completely ignored. Finally, Karen spun back to me, chin high. "You can fight this if you want, but the HOA has ways of dealing with difficult homeowners. Believe me, resistance never ends well." There it was, the threat. Subtle enough to sound professional, sharp enough to cut. Most people would have backed down, signed the checks, let her bully them into submission. But I wasn't most people. I stood, closing the distance between us, meeting her glare with a calm I knew she couldn't shake. "Karen, let me be very clear. This cabin is mine. It's private property. You and your HOA have no jurisdiction here. The next time you step foot inside without my permission, it won't be a conversation, it'll be a criminal complaint." For the first time, her confidence wavered. Just for a moment. She adjusted her clipboard, sniffed like she smelled something foul, and muttered, "We'll see about that." Then she stormed out, the screen door slamming behind her as she disappeared down the path. Silence returned, broken only by the soft hum of the lake breeze through the open windows. I turned back to my guest, who had been quietly watching the whole spectacle unfold. Their lips curved into the faintest smile. "Well," they said evenly, "she doesn't waste any time, does she?" I shook my head, pouring myself another coffee. "No. And something tells me this isn't the last time she'll come barging in. She thinks she's untouchable." Neither of us said the obvious truth aloud, that Karen had just walked into the wrong cabin, at the wrong time, in front of the wrong person. Because the guest sitting in my living room wasn't just any visitor. They were the state attorney general. And Karen had no idea. The day after Karen's dramatic intrusion, I woke up to find a bright yellow envelope stuck to my cabin door. No stamp, no mailing address, just hand-delivered arrogance. Inside was a notice of violation printed on official-looking HOA letterhead. The charges? Non-compliant window trim color. Excessive vegetation obstructing sightlines. Improper placement of decorative items, bird feeder. And my personal favorite, unapproved flag display. All of it ridiculous, and all of it irrelevant, because my cabin wasn't even under their HOA authority. I almost laughed, but the fine total at the bottom made my jaw tighten, $2,750 due within 10 days. Karen was testing me. By noon, 2 more envelopes appeared. By sunset, another 3. Each one stacked more fines on top of the last, ballooning the amount owed into the thousands. I started pinning them on my fridge like a warped art project, a collage of harassment. But I didn't panic. I documented. Every notice was photographed, dated, and backed up to the cloud. If Karen wanted to play the paper trail game, I'd make sure mine was stronger. That evening, I sat on the porch sipping iced tea when I noticed the same black SUV crawl past my driveway. Slow, deliberate. The same one I'd seen idling by the lake the night before. Its tinted windows reflected nothing but the water's shimmer, but I could feel the eyes behind them. Watching. 10 minutes later, another car appeared, a silver sedan this time, parked half-hidden near the tree line. A man with a long lens camera leaned casually against it, pretending to admire the lake while snapping pictures of my cabin. I muttered under my breath, "This is getting serious." From inside, my guest, the Attorney General, stepped onto the porch. Their gaze followed mine, settling on the sedan. They didn't look surprised. "Harassment like this often points to something deeper," they said calmly. "She's not just trying to enforce rules. She's setting you up." The thought chilled me more than the lake breeze. Karen wasn't just writing tickets. She was laying groundwork, building a case to strip me of my property. The next day, I caught Rachel, Karen's so-called HOA secretary, lurking by the edge of my dock. Clipboard in hand, she pretended to jot notes about the shoreline. After noon, I called out. "Lose something?" She jumped like a guilty child. "Oh, no! Just routine inspection. The HOA has concerns about erosion and safety hazards." "Funny," I replied, "since the HOA doesn't govern this dock." Rachel flushed, then quickly asked, "Do you keep financial records here? Any mortgages still open on the property?" The question hit me sideways. What secretary checks mortgages during a shoreline inspection? I smiled, masking my suspicion. "All handled. Thanks for your concern." She scribbled something on her clipboard, muttered about non-compliance, and hurried back up the path. By now, it was clear. This wasn't about paint colors or bird feeders. This was a calculated attempt to squeeze me, fine me into bankruptcy, then swoop in when I couldn't pay. That night, another envelope slid under my cabin door. No knock. No footsteps after. Just silence and the faint rustle of paper against wood. I opened it carefully. Inside wasn't just another violation notice, it was a lien notification. According to the letter, the HOA had filed a lien against my property for $18,450 in unpaid fines. Completely fraudulent. Completely illegal. I sat at the table, the letter trembling in my hand. Across from me, the Attorney General read it silently, their eyes narrowing. "This isn't just harassment anymore," they said. "This is fraud. And if they're filing liens they know don't exist, they're leaving a trail we can use." I exhaled slowly, the weight of the situation pressing in. The lake was quiet, but the tension around my cabin was loud. Every car creeping by, every envelope shoved under my door, it all pointed to one thing. Karen wasn't going to stop. She thought she could bully me into giving up. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't standing alone. I had the law on my side, sitting in my living room. And Karen was digging her own grave, one bogus violation at a time. The lake used to sing me to sleep at night. Crickets, owls, and the occasional splash of a fish breaking the water. But ever since Karen started her campaign, the soundtrack had changed. Now it was the low rumble of car engines creeping by after dark, camera shutters clicking from the tree-line, and the feeling, constant, heavy, that someone was watching. It started subtle. A black SUV idling at the end of my driveway. A silver sedan parked down by the trailhead, its driver pretending to scroll on his phone while glancing toward my windows. Then, one night, I saw the unmistakable red glow of a recording light across the lake. Someone had set up a camera on a tripod pointed straight at my cabin. I wasn't just annoyed anymore. I was being hunted. Inside, the Attorney General reviewed the latest violation envelope Karen had dropped off. Their voice was calm but firm. "She's escalating. The surveillance is designed to intimidate you. But it's also evidence. If she's orchestrating this through the HOA, we can prove organized misconduct." That was when I made my decision. If Karen wanted to watch me, I was going to watch her back. The next morning, I drove into town and picked up a set of motion-activated cameras, small, weatherproof, perfect for blending into the trees. By nightfall, I had them installed around the cabin, one facing the driveway, one by the dock, and another inside the front entryway disguised behind a bookshelf. Every lens fed straight to my laptop and backed up to cloud storage. When I told the Attorney General my plan, they gave a rare smile. "Document everything. Let her dig her own hole." It didn't take long. That same night, headlights swept across my yard. I killed the cabin lights and peeked through the blinds. Karen's SUV rolled in, followed by another car. She stepped out, clipboard in hand, and strutted to my porch like she owned the place. Behind her lumbered Briggs, the HOA's so-called enforcer. Built like a linebacker, arms crossed, jaw set. His job wasn't paperwork. His job was intimidation. Karen rapped on the door but didn't wait for an answer. She tried the handle, found it locked, then turned to Briggs. "Document this," she snapped, her voice carrying easily through the night air. "He's refusing inspection." "That's another violation." Briggs lifted a camcorder, recording the locked door like it was a crime scene. From my hidden camera, I caught every second, her words, his footage, their trespassing. The next day, Rachel returned, this time under the pretense of delivering updated bylaws. But she wasn't subtle. Her eyes darted around my cabin interior as I held the door half shut. She asked odd questions again, whether I planned to sell the property, whether I kept my deed on site, whether I had contingency insurance. She was fishing. Not for violations, for leverage. I didn't bite. I smiled, took the packet, and closed the door. Behind me, the Attorney General shook their head. "She's in deeper than she knows. Karen is using her as a scout." By now, I had hours of footage, Karen trespassing, Briggs recording, Rachel probing. Piece by piece, the puzzle was forming. But the envelope that arrived that evening confirmed the bigger picture. It wasn't just fines anymore. It was a notice of foreclosure proceedings, claiming the HOA was moving to seize my cabin for unpaid dues. Unpaid dues that didn't exist. I set the letter on the table, my hand steady even as anger burned in my chest. Across from me, the Attorney General read it carefully, then looked up. "This isn't bluffing anymore. This is criminal. She's manufacturing grounds for theft of property. And if she's bold enough to file foreclosure on a house outside her jurisdiction, she's convinced nobody will stop her." I leaned back in my chair, the glow of my laptop showing Karen's face frozen in a still frame from last night's trespass. Clipboard in hand, jaw set with arrogance. "She thinks she's untouchable," I muttered. The Attorney General's eyes narrowed. "Then it's time to touch her. Let her make the next move. When she does, we'll be ready." The lake was quiet again, but it didn't feel peaceful. Not yet. The trap was set, the cameras were rolling, and Karen had no idea she was already caught in her own web. By the fourth week of Karen's harassment, my cabin no longer felt like a retreat. It felt like a war zone disguised as a lakeside getaway. Every day brought a new envelope, a new violation, a new reason she claimed I owed money. But on Thursday night, something changed. Something that turned this from harassment into open warfare. I was locking up the windows when I heard it, soft footsteps on my porch. No knock this time. No voice calling out. Just the faint scrape of paper against wood, then silence. I waited until the sound of retreating footsteps faded before opening the door. Lying there was a thick, manila envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just one word scrawled in bold black marker, final notice. I carried it inside, set it on the table, and opened it carefully while the Attorney General watched from across the room. Inside were documents, dozens of them. Not violation slips. Not fines. Something far more dangerous. At the top of the first page, notice of pending foreclosure. I felt my jaw tighten as I skimmed the pages. According to the documents, the HOA had filed a lien for over $42,000 in unpaid dues and penalties. The papers claimed I had defaulted, and that foreclosure proceedings would begin in 30 days unless the balance was paid in full. I let out a sharp laugh. $42,000? On a cabin that's never owed them a dime? The Attorney General didn't laugh. They flipped through the pages, scanning every line. "These are fabricated," they said grimly. "And worse, they're dressed up to look official. This isn't just harassment, it's fraud with intent to steal property." I sank into my chair, my eyes still locked on the fake foreclosure notice. I had known Karen was corrupt, but this was theft dressed in legal paper. The following morning, I noticed movement at the tree line. I grabbed my binoculars and spotted Briggs, the HOA's enforcer, talking to a man I didn't recognize. The stranger held a camera, photographing my cabin from every angle, roof, dock, driveway. Documenting it like real estate agents do before a listing. Rage surged through me. They were already planning how to sell what they hadn't even stolen yet. That afternoon, Rachel showed up again. Clipboard clutched to her chest, her expression unusually nervous. "Hi," she said too sweetly. "Just checking in on some updates. The HOA wanted me to confirm whether you keep your deed here at the property or in a safety deposit box." That was it, the final piece of the puzzle. She wasn't even pretending anymore. I leaned against the doorframe, studying her carefully. "Rachel, do you realize what you're a part of?" Her eyes flickered, guilt flashing across her face before she masked it with a tight smile. "I'm just doing my job." "Your job," I said evenly, "is going to get you charged alongside Karen. You understand that, right?" Her smile faltered. She mumbled something about just following orders and hurried back up the path. When I closed the door, the Attorney General was already waiting with a plan. "It's time," they said. "You've got enough footage. Enough documentation. But we need them to expose themselves fully, on record, beyond denial." I nodded. The hidden cameras had already captured Karen's trespassing, Briggs' intimidation, and Rachel's probing questions. But now, with the fraudulent foreclosure papers, the stakes were undeniable. "Let them come inside," I said slowly. "Let them try something bold. The moment they do, we'll have everything." That night, I sat awake by the fireplace, the manila envelope still on the table beside me. Outside, the lake shimmered under a pale moon, but I couldn't shake the storm building in my chest. Karen thought she had me cornered. She thought she could strip me of my cabin with her fake paperwork and her bully squad. But what she didn't know was that her so-called final notice wasn't my breaking point. It was hers. The trap was set. And soon, she was going to walk straight into it. The night it all came to a head was colder than usual. A heavy fog clung to the lake, swallowing the moonlight and turning the water into a sheet of silver mist. Perfect cover for the kind of people who didn't want to be seen. Inside the cabin, every camera was armed, every feed live streaming to secure cloud storage. I double-checked the angles, one above the door, one facing the living room, another hidden in the rafters. If Karen and her crew thought they were coming here unseen, they were in for the rudest awakening of their lives. The Attorney General sat calmly at the table, flipping through the fraudulent foreclosure notice like it was a bedtime story. Their composure was unshakable. Meanwhile, I paced, every creak of the cabin floorboards setting my nerves on edge. At 11:47 p.m., headlights flickered across the fog. Then another set. 2 vehicles, pulling in slow. I killed the lantern and crouched by the window. Karen's SUV rolled up first, her license plate glinting in the mist. Right behind it, a battered pickup truck. Briggs stepped out, bulky silhouette outlined against the headlights. He carried a crowbar. Karen marched up the porch steps like she was walking into her own home. Clipboard in hand, smugness radiating off her even through the fog. "Tonight's the night," I muttered under my breath. The first thud came as Briggs shoved the crowbar under my front door. The cameras caught everything, the splintering wood, Karen's gleeful expression, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Record this," she barked, turning to one of her accomplices holding a phone. "Document noncompliance and refusal to vacate. This property is officially under HOA repossession." Repossession. The word twisted in my gut. She wasn't just bluffing anymore, she believed her lies. The lock gave way. The door swung open. Karen barged in first, clipboard raised like a badge of authority. Briggs followed, crowbar resting on his shoulder, eyes scanning the cabin. 2 other board members trailed behind, one of them live streaming on Facebook. I stayed seated in the living room, calm, waiting. My guest, the Attorney General, didn't flinch. They folded the foreclosure notice neatly and set it on the table. Karen spotted me and sneered. "You had your chance to cooperate. Now the HOA is reclaiming what's owed. Consider this an official takeover." Her words echoed through the cabin. Every syllable captured by hidden microphones, every smirk immortalized on video. I leaned back in my chair. "Funny thing, Karen," I said evenly. "You keep calling this official. But you do realize what you're doing right now is called breaking and entering, right?" She scoffed. "You can call it whatever you want. The HOA rules override." And then she stopped. Mid-sentence. Because for the first time, she noticed the other person in the room. The Attorney General lifted their gaze, calm but sharp. "Go on," they said, voice smooth but heavy with authority. "I'd like to hear how you think your HOA rules override state and federal law." Karen blinked. Her clipboard slipped just slightly. Briggs frowned, uncertain. The live streamer's phone wavered. Who are you?" Karen stammered. The Attorney General reached into their coat, pulled out a leather wallet, and flipped it open. The gold seal gleamed in the dim light. "Samantha Grant," they said clearly. "State Attorney General. And I think we've seen enough." The silence that followed was electric. Karen's face drained of color. Briggs shifted uncomfortably, the crowbar suddenly too heavy in his hands. The live streamer fumbled with their phone, muttering, "Oh my God." I leaned forward, hands clasped. "Smile, Karen. You're on about 6 different cameras right now. And every word you said tonight is already backed up offsite." The Attorney General stood, every inch of their presence radiating authority. "Breaking and entering. Fraudulent foreclosure filings. Racketeering. Harassment. You've just turned your HOA into evidence in a federal case." Karen opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. The queen of the clipboard, speechless at last. And as the weight of reality sank in, I knew the trap had sprung shut. The cabin was dead silent. Karen's face had gone pale, her clipboard hanging uselessly at her side. Briggs shifted from one foot to the other, crowbar still in his hand, but the bravado in his posture was gone. The live streamer lowered their phone, whispering to the other board member, "We're screwed." The Attorney General closed their badge case and took a slow step forward. "Do you realize what you've just done?" Their tone wasn't angry, it was surgical, each word slicing away Karen's excuses. "You forced entry into private property. You attempted to enforce fraudulent foreclosure documents. And you broadcasted it online. Karen tried to recover her composure. This is a misunderstanding. A simple mix-up. The HOA. The Attorney General cut her off. The HOA doesn't have foreclosure authority in this state without court approval. And even if you did, these documents are falsified. That makes this not a mix-up, it makes it fraud. Briggs muttered. She said it was legal. His eyes darted nervously between Karen and the Attorney General. His loyalty was cracking. Karen snapped at him. Shut up, Briggs. Don't say another word. But it was too late. The weight of the evidence was crushing her little empire. I stood and walked to the fireplace, pulling a slim folder from the mantel. You want to talk about evidence? I laid it on the table and flipped it open. Inside were printed screenshots, timestamped video stills, and copies of the harassment notices they'd left at my door. This isn't just about one break-in. I've got weeks of footage. Every violation slip. Every intimidation tactic. Every time you step foot on this property without cause. The Attorney General nodded. And now, thanks to tonight, we have direct proof of organized criminal activity. This isn't just an HOA dispute, it's racketeering. That means federal charges. Karen's clipboard slipped from her hands and clattered to the floor. She looked at me, eyes blazing with a mix of fury and fear. You set me up. I met her glare calmly. No, Karen. You set yourself up. All I did was let you walk into your own trap. The live streamer, still shaking, finally found their voice. So, this is all going to court? Like, prison? The Attorney General's gaze cut to them, sharp and unwavering. If you knowingly participated, yes. But cooperation might reduce your liability. The board member swallowed hard and nodded quickly. I'll talk. I'll give you everything. Karen made us do it. Karen spun on them, spitting venom. Traitors! All of you. I built this HOA. I kept this neighborhood clean, respectable. And this cabin, she jabbed a finger toward me. Doesn't belong here. Doesn't belong with us. Her voice cracked on the last word, shrill and desperate. It was no longer about rules or dues. It was about control. About her warped sense of ownership over everything around her. The Attorney General's voice cut through a rant like steel. What doesn't belong here, Karen, is corruption. And tonight, we have everything we need to dismantle it. As if on cue, headlights cut through the fog outside. This time, they weren't Karen's allies. Blue and red lights strobed against the trees. Engines idled, doors slammed, and the crunch of boots on gravel filled the night. Sheriff's deputies poured onto the porch. One knocked sharply. Attorney General? We're here. The door opened, and within moments, Karen and Briggs were in cuffs. The live streamer and the other board member were separated for questioning. Karen screamed protests, threats, even promises of lawsuits, but none of it mattered now. The Attorney General watched calmly as Karen was let out. You'll have your day in court, they said coolly. But you won't be running an HOA from behind bars. I exhaled deeply, the tension draining from my shoulders for the first time in weeks. The cabin was quiet again, except for the muffled protests outside. The Attorney General turned to me with a faint smile. Congratulations. You didn't just defend your home, you helped expose a criminal enterprise. I glanced at the cameras still blinking red in the rafters. Guess all it took was patience, a few hidden lenses, and letting Karen be Karen. The days after the sting felt surreal. For the first time in weeks, the cabin was quiet, not the tense quiet before an attack, but the peaceful silence I had built this place to enjoy. No footsteps on the porch. No envelopes shoved under my door. Just the wind off the lake and the creak of pine trees swaying above the roof. But peace didn't mean it was over. It had only just begun. 3 days later, I sat in a county courthouse, rows of wooden benches filled with neighbors who had come to see the spectacle. Word had spread fast, an HOA president arrested for fraud, racketeering, and breaking into a resident's cabin with a crowbar-wielding enforcer. People whispered as Karen was led in, wrists chained, orange jumpsuit swallowing the authority she used to wear like armor. Briggs shuffled behind her, head low, his bulk diminished without the swagger. The two board members trailed in separately, one visibly shaken, the other staring at the floor like a child awaiting punishment. The Attorney General stood at the front, their voice steady as they outlined the charges: fraud, falsification of foreclosure documents, conspiracy, harassment, unlawful entry, racketeering. Every word landed like a hammer blow. Karen tried to interrupt, screeching about misunderstandings, claiming it was all standard HOA procedure. But the judge silenced her with a sharp rap of the gavel. "You'll have your chance to speak at sentencing, Mrs. Carter." Her shoulders sagged. For the first time, Karen looked small. Neighbors testified, one after another, about years of harassment. Fines for grass an inch too long, threats over mailbox colors, even citations for kids' bikes left in driveways. Many had been too afraid to push back, but seeing Karen caught in the act had cracked open their silence. "She bullied us," one man said bluntly. "We thought she was unstoppable. But now we know she was just a tyrant with a clipboard." Laughter rippled through the courtroom before the judge restored order. When my turn came, I rose slowly, every eye in the room on me. "This cabin was my sanctuary," I said. "And she tried to turn it into her property. She didn't care about rules, she cared about power. But power without accountability always ends the same way." I looked at Karen then, and for a moment, she looked away. By the end of the hearing, the Attorney General had laid it all bare: the fake foreclosure documents, the live stream of the break-in, the threats, the fraud trail tied directly to Karen's accounts. The judge ruled there was enough evidence for federal prosecution. Bail was denied. When the deputies let her out, Karen screamed about appeals, about injustice, about how she'd be back. But the look on her face told the truth: she knew it was over. Weeks later, back at the cabin, I stood on the dock watching the sunset bleed into the lake. The water shimmered gold and orange, calm at last. My phone buzzed with a message from the Attorney General. Karen accepted a plea deal. She's facing 10 years. Briggs flipped on her. "The HOA is being dissolved. Congratulations, you helped take down the whole operation." I read the words twice before slipping the phone back into my pocket. Relief washed over me. Not just for myself, but for every neighbor who had lived under Karen's shadow. The cabin creaked gently behind me, its logs warm in the evening glow. For the first time in a long time, it truly felt like home again. I poured a glass of bourbon, sat on the porch, and listened to the chorus of frogs and crickets rising from the shoreline. Karen had thought she could control me. Thought her rules, her fake paperwork, her threats could scare me out. Instead, she had exposed herself in front of the highest law in the state. And as I leaned back in my chair, I smiled. The fight was over. Justice had been served. The weeks after the trial brought a stillness I hadn't felt in years. It was as if the whole lake had exhaled a long, weary breath the moment Karen's grip finally loosened. The birdsong returned to the mornings, fishermen cast their lines without glancing nervously at their docks, and neighbors, once afraid to speak to one another, started waving again across driveways and fences. The HOA was dissolved officially within a month. The Attorney General's office had filed for complete disbandment, citing criminal corruption and abuse of power. The bylaws, the fines, the so-called rules that Karen had weaponized, all had vanished in the stroke of a judge's pen. And in their place? Something far better: community. One Saturday morning, I hosted a gathering at the cabin. Nothing fancy, just a few picnic tables, a grill, and coolers full of soda and beer. But the atmosphere was electric. Families came down with lawn chairs and casseroles, kids splashed in the shallow water, and laughter carried across the lake like a song we'd all forgotten we knew. Old Mr. Jennings, who'd been fined over a dozen times for the color of his shutters, stood beside me with a paper plate piled high with barbecue. "I can't believe it," he said, shaking his head. "For the first time in years, I don't feel like someone's watching me every time I step outside." "That's because no one is," I said with a grin. "Except maybe the loons." He laughed, a deep, unguarded laugh that spoke of years of pent-up frustration finally released. Rachel showed up, too. She looked different without her clipboard, lighter, freer, as though she'd shed something heavy. She walked up nervously, a Tupperware dish in her hands. "I made brownies," she said quietly. "Figured I owed everyone a peace offering." I studied her for a moment, then nodded. "You stood by Karen longer than you should have. But you came around. That counts for something." Her smile was small but genuine. "I'm done with HOAs. I just want to live in peace." That made two of us. Later in the evening, as the sun sank low and painted the lake in molten orange, the Attorney General arrived. Not in an official capacity, no suit, no briefcase, just jeans, a flannel shirt, and a six-pack under their arm. They raised their bottle in a casual toast. To freedom. To neighbors who stand up for themselves. And to proving that no one is above the law. We all clinked bottles and cheered, the sound echoing across the water. For the first time, I looked around and realized this wasn't just about me winning a fight. It was about everyone here reclaiming something they'd lost: dignity, trust, and the right to simply live without fear. When night fell, the crowd lingered around a bonfire we'd built on the shore. Sparks leapt into the sky, and the children roasted marshmallows, their sticky fingers and giggles proof that life here had finally shifted back to what it was meant to be: simple, joyful, unpoliced. I sat back, letting the crackle of firewood wash over me. My cabin no longer felt like a fortress under siege. It felt like a home. The battle with Karen had been brutal, but in the end, it had done something unexpected: it had united us. The Attorney General leaned over and said quietly, "You know, you could have just sold this place and walked away. Most people would have." I smiled into the flames. "Yeah, but then Karen would have won. And this cabin isn't just wood and nails, it's freedom. Some things are worth fighting for." They nodded in agreement. "Then you didn't just win for yourself. You won for everyone here." And as the fire burned lower and the stars crowded the night sky, I knew they were right. The lake was no longer just a retreat, it was a beginning. A place where people could breathe again. A place no HOA, no Karen, would ever control again. Months passed, and the lake took on a rhythm I had almost forgotten. Seasons turned without the shadow of Karen's clipboard hovering over every home. The water froze in winter, thawed in spring, and glittered again under the summer sun. Through it all, the cabin remained, a witness to a fight that had changed more than just one man's life. The trial ended in a conviction. Karen received 10 years for fraud, racketeering, and conspiracy. Briggs testified against her and served 2, while the live streamer got probation for cooperating. The HOA ceased to exist, its bank account seized, its bylaws shredded. What was left behind wasn't emptiness, it was freedom. But the real victory wasn't just in the courtroom. It was in what came after. A year to the day of Karen's arrest, the community gathered again at the lake. This time, it wasn't for a party. It was for dedication. The county had voted to turn the old HOA office into a community resource center, a place where neighbors could meet, kids could play, and decisions were made together, without fines or threats. A plaque hung by the door, dedicated to the residents who stood against corruption and reclaimed their right to community. Freedom is stronger together. I stood in front of it with a quiet pride. Not because my name was mentioned, it wasn't, but because I knew the cabin had been the spark. Life at the cabin had changed, too. I no longer sat on the porch expecting to see headlights creeping through the fog. Instead, I saw kids fishing off the dock, families kayaking in the mornings, and neighbors dropping by with baked goods or fresh vegetables from their gardens. Rachel came often, too. She traded her clipboard for gardening gloves, planting wildflowers by the lakeside with a group of kids from town. She told me once, I thought following orders kept me safe. But freedom, real freedom feels better. Her words stuck with me. One autumn evening, the Attorney General, no longer in office, but still a respected figure, visited again. We sat on the porch with steaming mugs of cider, watching the leaves fall into the lake. You know, they said, that night in your cabin, it reminded me why I ran for office in the first place. Not to play politics, but to protect people who don't think they have a voice. I nodded. Funny thing is, Karen made me feel small. Powerless. Like I didn't matter. But the moment she broke in here, I realized something. Bullies always think they're untouchable until someone stands up. The Attorney General smiled faintly. And you stood up. Years from now, maybe no one will remember every detail of Karen's downfall. Maybe her name will fade into local legend, a cautionary tale whispered about the dangers of unchecked power. But I know one thing for certain, this cabin will always stand as proof that fighting back is worth it. The lake glows different now. It isn't just water and pine and wind. It's a reminder that freedom has to be defended, sometimes in ways you never expect. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the quiet ripple of the water against the dock. The fireflies blinked in the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a loon called out. The cabin was still here. I was still here. And thanks to one wild, unbelievable night with the Attorney General inside my living room, the community was stronger than it had ever been. This wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of a legacy.